The eviction notice hit Colt's chest like a verdict. The slap of paper against fabric echoed through the silent lobby of the Sycamore Street building. Every head turned. Every conversation died. The plastic Christmas tree in the corner flickered once, twice, its cheap light struggling against the weight of what was happening. Brinley's candy cane slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the tile floor, red and white fragments scattering like broken promises across the scuffed linoleum. She was 5 years old. Brown pigtails tied with red ribbon. A reindeer sweater her father had bought from the thrift store on Madison Avenue, the one with the torn tag he'd carefully cut away so she wouldn't know. She didn't understand the paper in her father's hands. But she understood the man standing too close. The one who smelled like cologne and something sour underneath. The one whose shadow fell over her like a threat. She pressed herself against her father's leg. Her small fingers clutched the fabric of his worn khakis, knuckles white. Colt Dwyer stood perfectly still. His janitor's uniform was clean but faded, the pale blue of a man who worked nights at Mercy General Hospital, pushing a mop through corridors that never ended, emptying trash cans that were always full. His hands were rough from years of work. Calluses on his palms. A scar on his left thumb from a broken bottle he'd cleaned up in the ER 3 winters ago. He was 34 years old but looked older. Not from age, from a weariness that lived behind his eyes. The kind of weariness that comes from watching people look through you. From being invisible in rooms full of people. Vernon Kresk stepped closer. He was 53. Silver hair slicked back with product that cost more than Colt made in a day. A cashmere coat. Italian shoes. The soft hands of a man who had never scrubbed a toilet, never fixed a leak, never worried about making rent. 30 days, Dwyer. Vernon's voice carried across the lobby, deliberately loud, deliberately public. He wanted everyone to hear. He wanted them to watch. Actually, given the holiday spirit, let's call it 25. I want you out by January 17th. Colt looked at the paper. His voice was quiet, measured. On what grounds? Property improvements. Section 14, paragraph 3 of your lease. Vernon smiled. The smile of a man who had done this before. Who enjoyed it. I'm renovating your unit. Going to make it real nice. Raise the rent to $1,400. Get a tenant who appreciates quality. You haven't improved anything in this building in 6 years. The smile vanished. Vernon stepped even closer. Close enough that Brinley shrank further behind her father's leg. Close enough that Colt could smell the bourbon on his breath. You think you're smart, don't you? Helping old ladies with their math. Reporting me to the city inspector. Asking about fire extinguishers like you're somebody important. He lowered his voice. But not enough. Everyone in the lobby still heard every word. You're nothing, Dwyer. You're a janitor who pushes a mop at the hospital and can barely afford to feed his kid. You're a single father with no family, no connections, no future. And I'm the man who decides whether you have a roof over your head. He flicked the eviction notice with his finger. Merry Christmas. If you've ever worked a job where someone treated you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter, drop a flexed biceps in the comments right now. This story is for you. Mrs. Finney stood by the mailboxes, her hand frozen on her walker. She was 83 years old. She'd lived in this building for 19 years, longer than anyone else. She'd watched Vernon's father run it, back when things got fixed and people were treated like human beings. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Vernon had raised her rent $200 last month. A calculation adjustment, he'd called it. She was living on Social Security and a pension that hadn't increased in a decade. She couldn't afford to make him angry. The Rodriguez family stood by the plastic Christmas tree. Maria and Eduardo. 3 kids between them, the youngest just 4 years old. Their apartment had black mold in the bathroom. Eduardo had reported it 11 times. 11. He had the emails. He had the certified letters. Nothing was ever done. Their oldest son had developed asthma. The doctor said it was environmental. They knew what that meant. But they couldn't afford to move. And they couldn't afford to fight. They looked at their shoes. No one spoke. No one helped. This was how it worked in Vernon Kresk's buildings. Everyone knew. Everyone was afraid. The man owned half the rental properties in this part of Cedar Falls. His brother-in-law sat on the city council. His college roommate ran the largest property management company in Iowa. He had judges who owed him favors, inspectors who looked the other way, lawyers who made problems disappear. You didn't challenge Vernon Kresk. You survived him. But something was wrong with this picture. Colt Dwyer should have been begging. Should have been angry. Should have been panicking. He was a single father who had just lost his home 2 days before Christmas. His daughter was clutching his leg, fragments of candy canes scattered at her feet, not understanding why the mean man was yelling at her daddy. He should have been desperate. Instead, he stood perfectly still. His face showed nothing. No anger. No fear. No desperation. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that didn't match a man in his position. The kind of stillness that came from somewhere deeper. Somewhere colder. The stillness of a man who was calculating. Assessing. Deciding. Vernon Kresk didn't notice. He was already turning away, already walking toward the elevator, already laughing at his own cruelty. His footsteps echoed on the tile. The elevator dinged. The doors slid open. "Happy holidays, everyone," Vernon called over his shoulder. "Don't forget, rent's due on the 1st. The doors closed. The lobby remained frozen. The broken candy cane lay scattered across the floor. The plastic star that had fallen from the tree earlier lay where it fell. No one moved to pick it up. Slowly, the other tenants began to drift away. Eyes down. Shoulders hunched. The Rodriguez family gathered their children and disappeared up the stairs. Mrs. Finney shuffled toward the elevator, not meeting Colt's eyes. And then it was just the two of them. Colt and his daughter. Alone in the lobby. The Christmas tree flickering beside them. Brinley tugged her father's hand. Her voice was small. Barely a whisper. "Daddy? Where are we gonna live?" Colt looked down at her. At her brown eyes, wide with confusion. At the ribbon in her hair coming loose. At the fear she was trying so hard not to show. He knelt down slowly. Took her face in his hands, gently, carefully, like she was made of glass. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Daddy's going to fix this." But the way he said it didn't sound like a janitor. It sounded like a promise. The kind of promise that costs someone everything. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom. Peeling wallpaper the color of old mustard. A radiator that clanked through the night like a dying animal, never quite warm enough, never quite silent. But it was home. Colt sat on the edge of Brinley's bed, the mattress sagging beneath his weight. Her room was tiny, barely large enough for a twin bed and a plastic dresser covered in stickers. Unicorns. Rainbows. A faded princess she'd gotten from a Happy Meal 2 years ago. But she'd decorated it. Made it hers. Crayon drawings covered every inch of available wall space. Houses with crooked chimneys. Stick figure families holding hands. A sun in every picture, bright yellow, always smiling. In Brinley's world, the sun was always shining. He read her 3 stories. The same 3 she asked for every night. The one about the bear who couldn't sleep, the one about the moon that got lost, the one about the little girl who wasn't afraid of anything. Brinley's eyes grew heavy. Her breathing slowed. "Daddy." "Yes, sweetheart." "Is the mean man going to take our house?" Colt brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "No. I promise." "How do you know?" He kissed her forehead. So gentle. The way he did every night. "Because I'm your daddy. And daddies fix things." She nodded, satisfied by the logic of it. Her eyes closed. Her breathing deepened. Within minutes, she was asleep. Colt watched her for a long moment. The rise and fall of her chest. The slight curl of her fingers against the blanket. The peace on her face that only children have. The peace of someone who trusts completely, who believes that the world is good because the people they love have made it so. He stood slowly, careful not to wake her. Pulled the blanket up to her chin. Turned off the lamp shaped like a butterfly. Then he walked to the living room window. Snow was falling on Sycamore Street. So silent. Relentless. The streetlight outside flickered. It had been flickering for months. Vernon had ignored every maintenance request. Somewhere in the building, a door slammed. Someone coughed. A television murmured through thin walls. Colt stared out at the night. He thought about the lobby. The way Vernon's voice had carried. The way Brinley had shrunk behind his leg. He thought about the other tenants. Their silence. Their fear. The way they'd looked at their shoes instead of speaking up. He thought about Mrs. Finney, 83 years old, too scared to say a word. Something cold settled in his chest. Not anger. Anger was hot. Impulsive. Anger made mistakes. This was something different. Something patient. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time and was now, slowly, opening its eyes. Colt walked to the kitchen. The drawer stuck. It always stuck. He pulled harder. Inside, mismatched utensils, dead batteries, a screwdriver with a broken handle, rubber bands, take-out menus from restaurants that had closed years ago. He reached past the clutter. His fingers found a seam. A false bottom he'd installed himself 3 years ago when he'd first moved in. Underneath, a phone. But unmarked. No case. No scratches. It looked brand new because it almost was. He'd used it perhaps a dozen times in 3 years. The battery was dead. He plugged it in. Waited. The screen glowed to life. No apps. No photos. No social media. No browser history. Just a contact list. No names. Only initials. HCMVRTDKRJPSW. Letters that meant nothing to anyone who might find this phone. Letters that meant everything to the people they represented. Colt scrolled to HC. He typed a message. 3 words. Buy the building. The reply came in 4 seconds. Timeline. Colt looked out the window. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the street, covering the cars, softening the edges of a hard world. He'd head back. Before he wakes up. The pause. 3 dots appearing and disappearing. Done. Colt scrolled to another contact. DKR. He typed again. Vernon Kresk. Cedar Falls, Iowa. Everything. No limits on budget. No limits on depth. The reply was instant. How far back? Colt thought about Brinley's question. Where are we gonna live? He thought about the fear in her eyes. The confusion. The way she'd clutched his leg like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly turned uncertain. He thought about what Vernon had called him. Nothing. He typed 1 word. Birth. The reply came 10 seconds later. Understood. You'll have a full dossier within 72 hours. Colt turned off the phone. Returned it to the hidden compartment. Slid the false bottom back into place. Closed the drawer. Then he washed the dishes. Folded laundry. Set his alarm for 5 a.m. Tomorrow, he would go to Mercy General Hospital. He would mop floors. He would empty trash cans. He would eat lunch alone in the basement, at a table by the boiler room where no one ever came. He would nod at nurses who never learned his name and doctors who never saw his face. He would be invisible, just like always. No one would notice anything different. But 1,200 miles away, in a glass office overlooking Central Park, a man named Harlan Cross put down his phone. He was 71 years old. Silver hair cropped short. Eyes the color of a winter sky. Pale, clear, cold. He wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars. His office was sparse. A desk, a chair, a wall of windows, and nothing else. No photographs. No diplomas. No awards. He didn't need to display his accomplishments. Everyone who mattered already knew them. Harlan Cross had dismantled 3 Fortune 500 companies. He'd defended 2 presidents. He'd made billionaires weep in courtrooms and senators resign in disgrace. He'd won cases that legal scholars said couldn't be won and lost none that mattered. He hadn't taken a new client in 4 years. Until now. He pressed an intercom button. Cancel my meetings for the next 2 weeks. All of them. His assistant's voice crackled through the speaker. Sir, the Whitfield merger. Cancel it. The depositions in the Harrington case. Postpone. The dinner with the Attorney General. Send my regrets. The pause. May I ask why? Harlan stared out at the Manhattan skyline. The snow was falling here too, thicker, angrier, driven by winds that whipped between the towers. An old friend needs a favor. He ended the call before she could respond. Harlan opened his laptop, typed a name into a search bar. Vernon Kresk. Cedar Falls, Iowa. The results populated. Property records. Business filings. Court documents. Local news articles. Social media posts. Harlan read for 3 hours. He read property records and tax filings. He read tenant complaints and health department reports. He read about building code violations and inspection failures and lawsuits that were settled quietly, out of court, with NDAs attached. When he was finished, he leaned back in his chair. And he smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Oh, Mr. Kresk." His voice was soft, almost gentle. "You have no idea what's coming." Vernon Kresk's house sat on the nicest street in Cedar Falls. It wasn't the biggest house in town. Vernon was too smart for that, too aware of appearances. But it was large enough to make a statement. 4 bedrooms. 3 bathrooms. A kitchen that had been remodeled twice in the past decade, each time more expensive than the last. Marble countertops. Custom cabinetry. A refrigerator that cost more than most of his tenants made in a month. He stood at the kitchen island, pouring bourbon from a bottle that cost $400. His wife, Lorraine, sat in the living room, watching something on her tablet. She'd stopped listening to him years ago. Stopped pretending to care. They slept in separate bedrooms now, had for almost a decade, but neither of them would ever admit it. Vernon didn't mind. He preferred talking to himself anyway. His thoughts were more interesting than anyone else's opinions. You should have seen his face. Vernon chuckled, swirling the bourbon in its crystal glass. Standing there in that pathetic uniform. Holding his kid's hand like that was going to protect him. The television murmured in the background. Lorraine didn't respond. 30 years I've been doing this. 30 years. You'd think these people would learn by now. He took a long drink, savoring the burn. You don't bite the hand that owns your roof. You don't ask questions. You don't make trouble. You pay your rent, you keep your head down, and you thank God someone like me is willing to rent to someone like you. He walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered lawn. His lawn service had just finished the fall cleanup before the first snow. Everything was pristine. Perfect. That's how Vernon liked things. Pristine. Controlled. Under his authority. Vernon had inherited the Sycamore Street building from his father, Harold Kresk. Harold had been a hard man, but he'd fix things when they broke. He'd known his tenants' names, their children's names, their problems and their joys. He'd attended their weddings and their funerals. He'd sent flowers when babies were born and casseroles when people got sick. Vernon had never understood it. Tenants were liabilities that occasionally produced assets. His job was to extract maximum value while providing minimum service. Every dollar spent on maintenance was a dollar out of his pocket. Every repair request was a negotiation he intended to win. The heating system in Building C hadn't been serviced in 6 years. When it failed last winter, 3 days of below-zero temperatures, tenants huddled in their apartments wearing coats and gloves. Vernon had told them to buy space heaters. "Not my job to keep you warm," he'd said. "That's what blankets are for." The black mold in apartment 4B had been spreading for 18 months. The Martinez family had reported it 7 times. Sent photos. Filed complaints. Vernon's response had been simple. He'd raised their rent. Told them they could leave if they didn't like it. They'd left. Problem solved. And then there was the staircase in Building D. Vernon knew the step was rotted. He'd known for months. A maintenance request sat on his desk, handwritten, desperate. A tenant begging him to fix it before someone got hurt. He'd ignored it. 7 months later, a child fell through. 8 years old. A girl named Lily. She'd been running down the stairs, excited because her grandmother was visiting. Her foot went through the rotted wood like it was paper. She'd fallen 8 feet before the next landing caught her. Broken arm. Broken collarbone. 3 days in the hospital. Nightmares for months afterward. Vernon's lawyer had handled it. A settlement, $40,000, paid through an insurance claim. An NDA, the family couldn't talk about it, couldn't sue later, couldn't warn anyone else. It all went away. And Vernon raised the rents in Building D by $75 across the board. To cover his legal fees, he told himself. The cost of doing business. He never fixed the staircase. Just covered it with a piece of plywood and put up a sign that said, "Use other stairs." His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His brother-in-law. The city council seat that kept Vernon's properties off the inspection list. Dale. What's up? Vernon. We might have a problem. Vernon set down his bourbon. What kind of problem? A fire inspector showed up at Building C today. Unscheduled. Started asking about permits, heating systems, emergency exits. Took a lot of notes. Vernon's grip tightened on the phone. Who sent him? Don't know yet. I checked the schedule. There was no inspection planned. Someone called it in. Anonymous tip. That's interesting. It gets better. A reporter from the Gazette called my office this afternoon, asking about tenant complaints, specifically about your properties. Wanted to know if the city council had received any formal grievances. Vernon's jaw clenched. He walked to the window, staring out at the falling snow. Someone's poking around. That's what it looks like. Find out who. Check the tip line. Check the reporter's sources. Check everything. And Dale? Yeah. Make it stop. He hung up. Vernon stood in the silence of his expensive kitchen, in his expensive house, surrounded by the evidence of 30 years of extracting wealth from people who had no choice but to pay. Something nagged at him. The janitor's face in the lobby. That unnatural stillness. The way he hadn't flinched, hadn't begged, hadn't shown any of the reactions Vernon had come to expect from people he crushed. Vernon shook it off. Finished his bourbon. Poured another. The janitor was nobody. A single father pushing a mop. No connections. No resources. No power. Probably just some do-gooder at the hospital. Some nurse who'd heard a sob story and made a few calls. It would blow over. It always did. Vernon had been playing this game for 30 years. He knew how to handle troublemakers. A threatened eviction here. A raised rent there. A quiet word to the right inspector, the right judge, the right reporter. By this time next week, everything would be back to normal. He headed upstairs to bed, confident as ever. He had no idea that 3 blocks away, in a tiny apartment with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that never stopped clanking, a man he had dismissed as nothing was already 3 moves ahead in a game Vernon couldn't even comprehend. The envelope arrived 2 days later, December 26th, the day after Christmas. Colt found it slipped under his door when he came home from his shift at the hospital. White envelope. Official seal. The weight of it told him everything before he even opened it. Brinley was in the living room, playing with the doll Mrs. Finney had given her for Christmas. A small gesture from a woman who had little but shared what she could. Colt waited until Brinley was absorbed in her game before he opened the envelope. Emergency eviction order. The words blurred together as he read, imminent property damage. Tenant negligence. Failure to maintain premises. Vacate within 72 hours. Judge Arthur Whitmore's signature at the bottom. Colt read it twice. Then a third time. 72 hours. 3 days. That was all they were giving him. He folded the paper carefully. Slid it back into the envelope. Set it on the kitchen counter. Then he made a phone call. Harlan Cross answered on the first ring. I received the filing an hour ago. Harlan's voice was calm. Almost amused. Like he was discussing the weather rather than the destruction of a man's life. Judge Arthur Whitmore signed it without a hearing. No notice. No due process. Highly irregular. Can you block it? I could file an emergency motion. Challenge the grounds. Demand a hearing. It would take a week, maybe 2. But that would reveal our hand too early. The pause. I have a better idea. I'm listening. The building purchase closed last night. 11:47 p.m. Shell company based in Delaware, owned by a holding company in Nevada, which is owned by a trust registered in Wyoming, which is controlled by another Shell in South Dakota. It would take a forensic accounting team 6 months to trace the ownership chain, and even then, they'd hit dead ends. Colt processed this. Vernon doesn't know. He has no idea. As of last night, you own the Sycamore Street building. Every unit. Every lease. Every tenant. You own Vernon Cresk's flagship property. Silence on the line. Which means, Harlan continued, technically speaking, you're his landlord now. Despite everything, Colt almost smiled. I thought you'd appreciate the irony. What about the dossier? Dominic delivered his preliminary report this morning. 142 pages. I've read every word. Harlan's voice dropped. Vernon Kresk has been very busy. Dominic Cade Reeves. DKR. A man Colt had worked with once before, years ago, when he'd needed to expose a pharmaceutical company that was falsifying drug trial data. Dominic had spent 3 years undercover in their manufacturing plants, documenting everything, every shortcut, every cover-up, every life endangered by corporate greed. When Dominic said he would find everything, he meant everything. How bad? Tax fraud. $340,000 in unreported rental income over the past decade. Payments routed through fake maintenance companies. Cash deposits structured to avoid federal reporting requirements. Colt listened. Building code violations. 17 violations across 5 properties. Exposed wiring. Non-functioning fire escapes. Mold contamination in 6 units. Heating failures that resulted in documented cases of hypothermia among elderly tenants. What else? Personal injury cases. 3 former tenants who suffered injuries from neglected repairs. The child who fell through the rotted staircase. Dominic found the family. They signed an NDA, but they're willing to talk now. Willing to testify if it comes to that. Colt's jaw tightened. And the judge? Arthur Whitmore. That's where it gets interesting. Harlan's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. Dominic traced payments from Vernon to Whitmore dating back 8 years. Disguised as consulting fees through a shell corporation. Total amount, $127,000. Bribery. Bribery. Which is a federal crime. And which means every ruling Whitmore has made in Vernon's favor is now tainted. Every eviction he's signed. Every case he's dismissed. All of it can be reopened. Colt sat in silence. The weight of it settled over him. He thought about Brinley. About the fear in her eyes in the lobby. Then he thought about the child who fell through the staircase. About the family that signed the NDA. About 8 years of pain and silence. Colt. Harlan's voice cut through his thoughts. How do you want to proceed? Colt was quiet for a long moment. I don't want to destroy him. Not yet. Explain. Destruction is fast. It's loud. It's satisfying for about 5 minutes, and then it's over. Colt's voice hardened. I want him to understand. I want him to feel what his tenants felt. The helplessness, the fear, the realization that someone else controls your fate. I want him to watch his empire crumble piece by piece and know exactly why it's happening. And then I give him a choice. He can surrender voluntarily, sign over his properties, confess to the fraud, walk away quietly. Or I take everything he has, publicly, permanently. And I make sure he knows exactly who did it. Harlan was silent for a moment. When he spoke, there was something like admiration in his voice. There's a city council meeting in 4 days. Dale Womack will be there. So will half the people who protect Vernon. Colt smiled for the first time since the lobby. Then that's where we start. The Cedar Falls City Council met in a beige room with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs. It smelled like old coffee, cheap carpet cleaner, and the particular variety of boredom that accumulates in government buildings. The walls were lined with photographs of past mayors, men in suits, women in pearls, all of them wearing the same practiced smile. Vernon Kresk sat in the back row. He didn't usually attend these meetings. They were beneath him, hours of droning about budget allocations and parking regulations and whether to install new streetlights on the north side of town. But Dale had insisted. Something about showing a united front. Something about the reporter who'd been asking questions. Vernon checked his watch. 6:47 p.m. He had a dinner reservation at 7:30. This needed to end soon. The council worked through its agenda. Budget allocations, road repairs, a debate about parking meters that went on far too long. Vernon's eyes glazed over. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through emails, answered a text from his property manager. Then the chair announced public comments. Vernon barely looked up. A woman stood from the third row. Mid-40s. Tired eyes. Brown hair threaded with gray. She wore a coat that was too thin for the weather, clutched a folder in both hands like it was keeping her upright. "My name is Patricia Callahan." Her voice wavered, then steadied. "I lived in the Sycamore Street building for 3 years." Vernon's attention sharpened. "Our apartment had black mold in the bathroom. My son started having breathing problems, coughing, wheezing, missing school. I reported it to the landlord, to Vernon Kresk, 11 times." She held up the folder. "I have the emails. I have the certified letters. I have the photographs I took every month, documenting how it spread." Murmurs rippled through the room. The council members shifted in their seats. Dale Womack's face went pale. "Nothing was ever done. My son developed chronic asthma. He's 7 years old now. The doctors say he'll have it for the rest of his life. Every time he uses his inhaler, every time he wakes up at night struggling to breathe, I think about those 11 reports. 11 times I asked for help. 11 times I was ignored." She sat down. Her hands were shaking, but her voice had been steady. Vernon's jaw tightened. Another woman stood. Younger. A toddler on her hip. Dark circles under her eyes. The look of someone who hadn't slept well in a very long time. "My name is Rachel Gutierrez. My daughter and I lived in Building D." Vernon recognized her. His stomach dropped. 2 years ago, my daughter fell through a rotted step on the staircase. She was 3 years old. She broke her arm and her collarbone. She spent 3 days in the hospital and 6 weeks in a cast. She still has nightmares. She still won't go near stairs without holding my hand. Rachel's voice cracked, but she continued. "We signed a settlement. We signed an NDA. I was told I couldn't talk about this, couldn't warn anyone, couldn't do anything to prevent it from happening to another child." She looked directly at Dale Womack. "But I just learned that NDAs don't cover matters of public safety. They don't cover ongoing hazards. They don't cover landlords who refuse to fix problems they know are dangerous." The toddler on her hip started to fuss. Rachel bounced her gently, never breaking eye contact with the council. "So here I am. I have photos of the staircase. I have medical records. I have the maintenance request that sat on Vernon Kresk's desk for 7 months before my daughter fell." She paused. Her voice dropped. "And I have a question for this council. How many children have to fall before someone does something?" The room erupted. Vernon sat frozen in his seat. His face cycled through confusion, outrage, and something he hadn't felt in years, something cold and creeping at the base of his spine. More tenants stood, one after another, each with a story, each with documentation. A man whose apartment flooded because Vernon refused to fix a pipe. He'd lost everything, had to throw away furniture, clothes, family photographs that were irreplaceable. A woman whose elderly mother was hospitalized with hypothermia after the heating system failed in January. Vernon had told them to buy space heaters, and her mother had nearly died. A family who found rats in their walls, actual rats, with nests and droppings, and were told to set traps and stop complaining. Vernon scanned the room. A reporter from the Cedar Falls Gazette stood in the corner, recording everything. A woman he didn't recognize sat in the front row, taking notes, professional, focused, watching the council members' reactions with the practiced eye of someone who knew how to read a room. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. Someone had organized this. Someone had found these tenants, gathered their documentation, prepared them to speak. Someone had timed it perfectly, the day after Christmas, when the news cycle was slow and a local scandal would dominate the headlines. Dale Womack slammed his gavel. "I think we've heard enough public comment for tonight. The council will take a brief recess and then move to point of order." A voice from the back of the room. Authoritative. Vernon turned to look. A man in a gray suit. 60s, maybe 70s. Silver hair. Eyes like ice. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, perfectly at ease. Under Iowa Code Section 21.6, public comment periods cannot be limited without prior notice provided in the meeting agenda. Any attempt to curtail these citizens' right to speak would be a violation of open meeting laws. Dale's face went pale. "And who are you?" The man smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Just a concerned citizen, with a particular interest in ensuring that government proceedings follow the law. Vernon stared at the man. Something about him was familiar, not his face, but his manner. The absolute confidence. The calm certainty of someone who was never, ever bluffing. Dale hesitated. Looked at the other council members. Found no support. "Fine. We'll continue with public comments." More tenants spoke. The pile of evidence grew. Vernon watched his reputation shred apart, one testimony at a time. By the time the meeting ended, Vernon was already in the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear. "Whitmore. Call me back. Now." He waited. Voicemail. He called again. Voicemail. He called Dale. "What the hell just happened in there?" "I don't know." Dale's voice was shaking. "Those people came out of nowhere. Someone organized this, Vernon. Someone with resources. Someone who knows what they're doing." "Find out who." "Find out now." Vernon hung up. Stood in the parking lot as snow began to fall. His hands were trembling, not from the cold. He drove home in silence. When he pulled into his driveway, he saw it immediately. An envelope on his doorstep. No return address. No postmark. Just his name, typed on a plain white label. He opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a single photograph. Vernon, accepting an envelope of cash from Judge Arthur Whitmore. In a parking garage. Taken from above, a security camera angle. A photograph that should not exist. And beneath it, a typed note. 72 hours. Sincerely, your new landlord. Vernon read it 3 times. His new landlord. What the hell did that mean? He looked up at the sky. Snow fell on his face, cold and relentless. For the first time in 30 years, Vernon Kresk had no idea what to do next. Vernon didn't sleep that night. By 6 a.m., he'd made 14 phone calls. Judge Whitmore wasn't answering. His secretary claimed he was out of the office indefinitely. That was judge speak for running scared. Dale picked up on the 7th ring. His voice was hoarse. "I've been up all night too. The reporter from the Gazette, she's filing a story. Front page. It runs tomorrow morning." "Kill it." Tried. "The editor won't budge. Someone's got him spooked. He's claiming there's more documentation coming from federal sources." He used that exact phrase. Federal. Vernon's blood ran cold. Federal? That's what he said. "Vernon, what the hell did you do? Who did you piss off?" Vernon hung up without answering. He stared at the photograph on his kitchen counter. Himself and Whitmore. The cash. The parking garage. Your new landlord. It didn't make sense. He owned the Sycamore Street building. Had owned it for 15 years. You couldn't just... He grabbed his laptop. Pulled up the county property records. Typed in the address. His hands froze on the keyboard. The records had changed. The Sycamore Street building was now owned by something called Arbor Holdings LLC. The transfer had been recorded on December 25th at 11:47 p.m. Christmas night. While Vernon was sleeping off his bourbon, dreaming of the janitor's humiliated face, someone had stolen his building. He spent the next 3 hours trying to trace Arbor Holdings. The company was registered in Delaware. It was owned by a holding company in Nevada, which was owned by a trust in Wyoming, which led to another shell company in South Dakota. Every trail ended in a dead end. Every document was pristine. Every transaction was perfectly legal. This wasn't amateur work. This was surgical. The kind of work that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and required lawyers who knew exactly how to hide money across state lines. Vernon called his attorney, Richard Metz. Metz had handled his contracts and settlements for 20 years. He would know what to do. Metz answered on the second ring. His voice was strange. "Vernon, I was just about to call you. I need you to trace a shell company. Arbor Holdings. Someone bought my building out from under me, and I need to know who." Silence. "Richard." "Vernon, I can't represent you anymore." "What?" I received a call this morning from the Iowa State Bar Association. Someone filed a complaint, multiple complaints, actually, about my handling of the Gutierrez settlement. The NDA, the pressure tactics, the failure to disclose the ongoing hazard. They're claiming ethical violations. Vernon's grip tightened on his phone until his knuckles went white. That's ridiculous. You did exactly what I told you to do. And that's the problem. Metz's voice was flat. Exhausted. I can't be associated with you right now. Not while this investigation is pending. I'm sorry, Vernon. You'll need to find new counsel. The line went dead. Vernon stared at his phone. The walls of his expensive kitchen seemed to be closing in. He called Franklin Tate, his college roommate, his fixer, the man who had made problems disappear for 30 years. Frank, I need help. Someone's coming after me, someone with serious resources. I need to know who. Franklin was quiet for a moment. I've already heard. Word travels fast in this business. He paused. Vernon, whoever this is, they're not local. The shell companies, the timing, the coordination, this is major league. This is New York or DC money. I don't care where the money's from. I've got connections too. I've got favors to call in. Then call them. But Vernon, Franklin hesitated. Watch your back. Whoever bought your building didn't do it for the rental income. They did it to send a message. Vernon hung up. Made more calls. Dale connected him with a state tax auditor, a man named Russ Pemberton who owed Dale a significant favor. Within hours, Pemberton launched an investigation into harassment and tortious interference targeting a local businessman. He issued subpoenas for any records related to Arbor Holdings. The subpoenas landed on Harlan Cross's desk at 3 p.m. Harlan called Colt immediately. Colt was eating lunch in the basement of Mercy General Hospital. A ham sandwich, an apple, a bottle of water. Still wearing his janitor's uniform. Still invisible. They're digging. Harlan's voice was calm but urgent. A state tax auditor named Pemberton. He's issued subpoenas for the Arbor Holdings documents. He's claiming we're engaged in harassment. Colt set down his sandwich. How much can they find? Nothing that leads directly to you. The shell structure is solid. But they're applying pressure to the law firms, the banks, the trust administrators. If they subpoena the right people, if they start interviewing the attorneys who set up the trusts, there are humans in those chains. Humans make mistakes. Humans can be pressured. How long do we have? 48 hours. Maybe less. Harlan paused. If they connect you to the building purchase, your cover is blown. Your identity. Your life in Cedar Falls. Everything you've built over the past 3 years. Colt stared at the concrete wall of the basement. A mop and bucket stood in the corner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. This was the life he'd chosen. Anonymous. Peaceful. But Brinley didn't know about the money. She knew Daddy worked nights at the hospital. She knew they lived in a small apartment and ate pancakes on Sunday mornings. She knew her life was simple and safe and full of love. That was worth more than $4 billion. But he thought about Mrs. Finney. About the Rodriguez family. About the child who fell through the staircase. He thought about every tenant Vernon had terrorized. Every complaint ignored. Every life damaged. There's another option, Harlan said. We accelerate. Stop playing defense. Hit them before they can hit us. Colt closed his eyes. Do it. Accelerate everything. You understand what that means. You'll have to reveal yourself. The billionaire story will go national. Your anonymous life ends. Colt opened his eyes. They were cold. Some things are worth more than anonymity. Eleanor Vance had won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. The first for exposing a pharmaceutical company that had covered up fatal side effects of a blood thinner. Deaths that could have been prevented, families destroyed by corporate greed. The second for a series on judicial corruption in Louisiana that had sent 3 judges to prison and forced the resignation of a state attorney general. She didn't take meetings with anonymous sources. She didn't chase tips from people who refused to identify themselves. Too many hoaxes. Too many wasted hours. Too many people who wanted to manipulate journalists for their own ends. But when she received an encrypted email offering documentary evidence of systematic housing fraud, judicial bribery, and political corruption in Iowa, she didn't delete it. She booked a flight. Not because of the subject matter. Housing fraud wasn't exactly her usual beat. Because of the source. The email had come through a server in New York. When Eleanor traced the digital signature, she recognized it immediately: Harlan Cross. Harlan Cross didn't contact journalists. He didn't need publicity. He didn't seek attention. He operated in a world where the most powerful moves were the ones no one ever heard about: silent acquisitions, quiet settlements, invisible leverage. If Harlan Cross was reaching out, the story was real. And it was big. They met in Chicago. A private conference room in a hotel Eleanor had used before, secure, anonymous, no cameras. Colt arrived in a simple gray suit. No watch. No cufflinks. No visible signs of wealth. He looked like a middle manager at a regional insurance company. The kind of man you'd walk past without a second glance. But when he spoke, Eleanor recognized something behind his words. A precision. A patience. The voice of a man who was used to moving pieces across very large boards. "You've done your research on me," Colt said. It wasn't a question. Enough to know you don't exist. At least, not on paper. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying him. No social media. No photographs. No interviews. No Forbes profile. No business magazine covers. Nothing. You're worth over $4 billion, and you've managed to stay completely invisible. That takes work. It was intentional. Why? Colt was quiet for a moment. I grew up poor. Truly poor, not tight budget poor, but sleeping in my car at 17 poor. When I made my money, I watched my peers change. Watched them become people they would have hated when they were young. They forgot what it felt like to be invisible. They started treating waiters and janitors like furniture. And you didn't want to become that. I wanted to make sure I hadn't already. Colt's eyes were steady. So I went back, rented a cheap apartment, got a job pushing a mop, became invisible again. And what did you find? Something worse than I expected. Colt slid a folder across the table. 142 pages. The complete dossier on Vernon Kresk. A system designed to extract wealth from vulnerable people while protecting the powerful. Landlords who see tenants as profit centers. Officials who sell their oaths for cash. Judges who sign eviction orders without hearings. Eleanor read for 20 minutes. Her face hardened with each page. This is criminal. Multiple felonies. How did he operate this long without getting caught? Because he owns the people who would catch him. The city council. The judges. The inspectors. It's a closed system. And you want me to open it. I want you to prepare a story. Complete. Documented. Ready to publish within hours. Colt leaned forward. But you don't release it until I give the signal. Why the delay? Because I'm going to give Vernon Kresk a choice. Surrender voluntarily, sign over his properties to a tenant protection nonprofit, confess to the fraud, disappear quietly. Or I take everything from him, publicly, permanently. That's generous. It's not generosity. It's strategy. Colt's voice was cold. A voluntary confession creates a template. Other landlords see what happens when you cooperate, and they see what happens when you don't. Eleanor studied him. Men like Vernon Kresk don't surrender easily. They have too much pride, too much invested in believing they're untouchable. Colt stood, buttoned his jacket. Then they learn what it costs. The next morning, Colt didn't go to work. He set his alarm for 5 a.m. anyway, habit. Made Brinley breakfast. Walked her to Mrs. Finney's apartment for the day. Hugged her a little longer than usual. Then he returned to apartment 3B. He opened his closet, pushed aside the janitor's uniforms, pale blue, faded, soft from 1,000 washings. Behind them, a garment bag, but zipped shut, untouched for 3 years. Inside, a suit that cost more than Vernon Kresk's car. Colt put it on, adjusted the cuffs, looked in the mirror. A different man looked back. The same face, the same hands, but everything else was different. The posture. The presence. The quiet authority that came from knowing exactly how much power you held. For 3 years, he'd been invisible. That ended today. He picked up a set of car keys from the hidden drawer. Not the rusted Honda he drove to work at Mercy General. A different set. Keys to a black Mercedes that had been parked in a storage unit for 3 years, registered to a company that didn't exist. Colt drove across Cedar Falls. Past the hospital where he mopped floors. Past the diner where he sometimes ate alone. Past the building he now owned. He pulled into Vernon Kresk's driveway. Parked behind the Lexus. Walked to the front door. And knocked. Vernon Kresk opened the door in a bathrobe. 2 days of stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept in 48 hours. His hair, usually slicked back with expensive product, was tangled and unwashed. He looked like a man who was losing. Vernon saw the suit first. Italian wool. Charcoal gray. The kind of suit that whispered money so quietly you almost didn't hear it, but once you did, you couldn't hear anything else. Then he saw the face. For a long moment, he didn't understand. His brain refused to connect the pieces. The janitor. The man from the lobby. The one he'd evicted on Christmas Eve. The one he'd called nothing. Standing on his porch in a $4,000 suit. Mr. Kresk. The voice was calm. Polite. The voice of a man who had absolutely nothing to prove. May I come in? Vernon's mouth opened. I think we should talk, Colt said. Don't you? Vernon stumbled backward. Colt walked past him into the foyer, through the living room, to the window that overlooked the snow-covered lawn. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, perfectly at ease. Like he owned the place. Who? Vernon's voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Who the hell are you? You know who I am. Colt didn't turn around. His voice was conversational. Almost friendly. You served me eviction papers 2 days before Christmas. You did it in front of my 5-year-old daughter, in front of a lobby full of witnesses, because you wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to make an example. Turned. You called me nothing. You said I could barely afford to feed my child. His eyes met Vernon's. You were wrong. Vernon's confusion curdled into anger. It was easier than fear. This is some kind of scam. You're a con artist. I've seen your pay stubs. You make $32,000 a year. That's what my pay stubs say, yes. Then how? Mr. Kresk. Colt's voice was patient. The patience of a man explaining something simple to someone who was very slow. I'm going to explain some things to you. I need you to listen carefully, because what happens next depends entirely on your choices. Colt reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder, set it on the coffee table. This is a dossier. 142 pages. It documents every crime you've committed over the past 15 years. He opened the folder, began laying out photographs, documents, spreadsheets, tax fraud, $340,000 in unreported rental income, payments routed through shell companies, cash deposits structured to avoid federal reporting requirements, a photograph of bank statements, building code violations, 17 violations across 5 properties, exposed wiring, non-functioning fire escapes, mold contamination, heating failures, photographs of rot, of mold, of exposed pipes, personal injury cases, 3 former tenants injured by your negligence, the child who fell through the rotted staircase. I've spoken with her family. They're no longer bound by your NDA. They're willing to testify. A photograph of a little girl in a hospital bed, her arm in a cast. And this. Colt laid down the final photograph. Payments to Judge Arthur Whitmore. 8 years of bribery. $127,000. Disguised as consulting fees. All documented. Vernon's face went gray. This is blackmail. This is an offer. Colt's voice didn't rise. You have 2 choices. Door number 1. You sign over all 5 of your properties to a tenant protection nonprofit that I've established. You provide a full written confession to the tax fraud. You leave Cedar Falls and never contact any of your former tenants again. In exchange, I recommend leniency to the federal prosecutors. And door number 2? I take everything you have. Colt's voice hardened. The story runs tomorrow, nationally. The dossier goes to the IRS, the FBI, and the Iowa Attorney General simultaneously. Your accounts are frozen. Your properties are seized. Judge Whitmore is indicted, and he names you as the source of every payment. Dale Womack resigns to avoid prosecution. Vernon was trembling. His hands. His voice. You can't do this. I have lawyers. Your lawyer dropped you yesterday. Richard Metz. State Bar complaint. I'll find another. No one in Iowa will touch you. I made calls this morning. Every firm that might have taken your case has already received a summary of the evidence. They've all declined. Vernon's face cycled through rage, disbelief, desperation. Who are you? Colt was silent for a moment. I'm the man you evicted on Christmas Eve. I'm the janitor who mops floors at Mercy General Hospital. I'm a single father who reads his daughter 3 stories every night. He paused. I'm also worth $4.2 billion. I've bought and sold companies larger than this entire town. I've testified before Congress. I've had dinner with 3 presidents. His voice dropped. And you called me nothing. Vernon's hands were shaking. His face was pale. But something hardened behind his eyes, the old cruelty, fighting for survival. I don't believe you. This is a bluff. You're some kind of con artist. You think you can scare me? He stepped forward, jabbing a finger at Colt's chest. I've been running this town for 30 years. I have friends you haven't even found yet. Colt didn't flinch. I was hoping you'd say that. Vernon's face twisted. Get out of my house. Colt walked to the door. Opened it. Turned back. You had a choice, Mr. Kresk. You chose to humiliate a man in front of his daughter. You chose to terrify a 5-year-old on Christmas Eve. You had a chance to surrender with dignity, and you chose pride. He stepped outside. The cold air hit his face. Now you'll learn what that costs. Colt walked to his car. Pulled out his phone. Typed one word to Eleanor Vance. Publish. He drove away. Vernon stood in his doorway, bathrobe flapping in the winter wind. His phone buzzed. Text from Dale Womack. Something's happening. Turn on the news. Now. Vernon stumbled inside. Fumbled for the remote. The screen flickered to life. His face filled the screen. His name in bold letters beneath it. The Churin read, Breaking. Billionaire exposes Iowa landlord's decades of fraud. Vernon watched as his entire world began to burn. The story went nuclear. Eleanor Vance's article appeared on the front page of 3 national news sites within the first hour. CNN picked it up by noon. MSNBC by 1. Fox by 2. The headline variations all centered on the same hook. Billionaire goes undercover as janitor. Exposes corrupt landlord. It was too perfect. Too cinematic. Too satisfying. A tech billionaire who'd grown up poor. Who'd chosen to live anonymously in a cheap apartment with his daughter. Who'd worked as a janitor, an actual janitor, mopping floors at a hospital, while secretly orchestrating the downfall of a corrupt landlord who'd made the mistake of trying to evict him. The story wrote itself. Cable news ran it on loop. The photograph of Vernon accepting cash from Judge Whitmore became a meme. Someone created an animated GIF of Vernon getting evicted from his own house. It went viral. By 3 p.m., the hashtag #EvictVernon was trending nationally. The federal agents arrived at Vernon's house at 2:47 p.m. 2 black SUVs. No sirens. They pulled into his driveway quietly, professionally. A neighbor captured the footage on her phone. It was on social media within minutes. Vernon emerged in handcuffs. He'd changed out of his bathrobe into a wrinkled suit, the same one he'd worn to the city council meeting, the one that had seemed so expensive 3 days ago and now looked shabby and desperate. His face was pale. His eyes darted around, searching for someone to help. No one did. The charges, announced by the U.S. Attorney's Office in Des Moines at 4 p.m. Tax evasion. 7 counts. Wire fraud. 4 counts. Bribery of a public official. 3 counts. Conspiracy to obstruct justice. 2 counts. Judge Arthur Whitmore was arrested the same afternoon. He tried to run, packed a suitcase, headed for the airport, but federal agents were waiting at the terminal. He offered to cooperate immediately, named Vernon as the source of every payment, provided bank records, emails, text messages. His legal career was over. His freedom was next. Dale Womack resigned from the Cedar Falls City Council at 4:15 p.m. His statement claimed he was stepping down to spend more time with family. No one believed him. The state ethics board announced an investigation before the ink was dry on his resignation letter. Franklin Tate's property management company issued a statement severing all ties with Kresk Properties. 3 other officials connected to Vernon's network quietly resigned by the end of the day. The tenants of Sycamore Street learned the news together. Mrs. Finney's granddaughter called her, crying, "Grandma, there's a billionaire living in your building. He bought it. He owns it now. And he's going to fix everything." Mrs. Finney didn't understand at first. Then she remembered the young man in 3B. The one with the little girl. The one who'd helped her understand she was being overcharged. The one who always said hello in the hallway, who carried her groceries when the elevator was broken, who never seemed to mind being invisible. She sat down heavily in her chair. Oh my! The Rodriguez family received a letter the next day. Official letterhead, Arbor Holdings LC. Dear tenants, effective immediately, all rent increases implemented by the previous management are rescinded. A full building inspection will be conducted within 7 days, and all necessary repairs will be completed within 60 days. Rent will be frozen at current levels for a minimum of 2 years. You should never have been treated the way you were. I'm sorry I couldn't act sooner. Sincerely, your neighbor. Vernon was processed at the county jail by 6 p.m. Fingerprints. Orange jumpsuit. The uniform of a man who had lost everything. He asked to make a phone call. Then another. Then another. No one answered. His lawyer wouldn't take his calls. His friends had become strangers. His allies had become witnesses for the prosecution. Through the narrow window of his holding cell, he could see the parking lot, the news vans gathering, the reporters setting up their cameras, preparing for the evening broadcast. And across the street, half hidden in the shadows of a bare maple tree, a man standing still. The man was wearing a janitor's uniform, pale blue, faded, the uniform of someone invisible. Their eyes met through the glass. Colt didn't smile, didn't wave, didn't gloat. He just watched. Then he turned and walked away. Vernon's face crumbled. The last shred of defiance drained from his eyes. He finally understood not just what had happened, but what it meant. He had looked at a man and seen nothing, and that man had destroyed him. That night, Colt returned to apartment 3B. Brinley ran to the door when she heard his key in the lock. "Daddy!" He scooped her up, held her tight, buried his face in her hair. "Daddy, Mrs. Finney says you're famous now. She says you're a superhero." Colt laughed. The first real laugh in days. "Mrs. Finney is very kind. Are we still moving?" He set her down, knelt to her level, took her small hands in his. "No, sweetheart. We're staying. For as long as you want." She hugged him fiercely, her small arms around his neck, her breath warm against his cheek. For a moment, everything was perfect. Then his phone buzzed. A message from Harlan. "We have a problem." Vernon made calls from holding. "Someone's coming. Professional. International. Not local resources." Colt read it twice. His jaw tightened. He hugged Brinley tighter. The battle was won. But the war wasn't over. 3 months later, spring arrived in Cedar Falls. The snow melted. The trees began to bud. The days grew longer, the light softer, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and new growth. The Sycamore Street building looked different now. Fresh paint on the exterior, warm gray with white trim. Repaired steps, each one solid and safe. Functioning fire escapes, new railings, emergency lights that actually worked. Every unit had been inspected. Every violation corrected. The heating system, replaced entirely, hummed quietly through the walls, ready for next winter. Mrs. Finney's radiator worked for the first time in 6 years. When she felt the warmth spreading through her apartment, she sat in her chair and cried. Good tears. Relief tears. The tears of a woman who had waited so long to be warm. The Rodriguez family had a new bathroom. No mold. Proper ventilation. Fresh paint. Their children slept through the night now, no coughing, no wheezing. Eduardo had framed the letter from Arbor Holdings and hung it on the wall. A small playground had been installed in the courtyard behind the building. Swings and a slide and a sandbox. Brinley played there every afternoon, making friends with the other children, her laughter rising up through the spring air. The rent hadn't increased a penny. The professional threat Vernon had summoned from his holding cell turned out to be a private investigator named Carl Richter, a man with a reputation for finding dirt on wealthy targets, for digging up secrets and selling them to the highest bidder. Richter never got close. Harlan's team traced his connections, discovered outstanding warrants in 3 countries, and provided the relevant information to Interpol. He was arrested in Frankfurt, awaiting extradition. His investigation died with his freedom. Colt received confirmation in a single text from Harlan. Handled. Go live your life. He made one public statement, released through Eleanor Vance's column. I grew up mopping floors. I slept in my car. I learned what it feels like to be treated as less than human. When I made my fortune, I watched my peers forget those lessons. I watched them treat waiters and janitors and hotel cleaners like they were invisible. Like they didn't matter. I went undercover not to make a point, but to test myself. To see if I had become what I once despised. What I found was worse than I expected. A system designed to extract wealth from vulnerable people while protecting the powerful. Landlords who saw tenants as profit centers. Officials who sold their oaths for cash. Judges who signed eviction orders without hearings. But I also found something else. I found community. I found neighbors who helped each other despite their fear. I found a little girl who taught me that the simplest life can be the richest. To every landlord, every employer, every person in power, you never know who's watching. You never know who's waiting. Treat people with dignity, not because you might get caught, but because it's right. And to Vernon Kresk, you called me nothing. You were wrong. Vernon Kresk was denied bail. His trial was scheduled for August. The evidence against him was overwhelming. Tax records, building violations, testimony from dozens of former tenants. His own lawyer had testified against him. He sat in a cell in the county jail, waiting. The properties he'd spent 30 years accumulating were gone, transferred to the Cedar Falls Tenant Protection Alliance, a non-profit Colt had established. His bank accounts were frozen. His connections had abandoned him. His wife had filed for divorce. He was nothing now. Sunday morning. Colt and Brinley sat at their small kitchen table in apartment 3B. The same apartment they'd always lived in. The same peeling wallpaper, though Colt was thinking about fixing it. The same plastic dresser in Brinley's room, still covered in stickers. The same crayon drawings on the walls, the same sun shining in every picture. Pancakes. Maple syrup. Cartoons on the TV. Sunlight streamed through the window. The radiator was quiet. Spring had arrived, and for the first time, the building didn't need it. Brinley looked up from her pancakes. Syrup on her chin. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart. Are you really a billionaire? Colt smiled. Technically, yes. What does that mean? It means I have a lot of money. She considered this. Then why do we live here? Colt looked around the tiny apartment. The chipped paint on the windowsill. The creaky floorboard by the bathroom. The stain on the ceiling from a leak that had been fixed, finally, 2 months ago. Because this is home. She nodded. Seemed satisfied by the logic of it. Daddy. Yes. Are you a superhero? He laughed. Reached across the table. Wiped the syrup from her chin. No, sweetheart. I'm just your dad. She looked at him with those brown eyes, serious, thoughtful, wise beyond her years. That's better. Colt pulled her into a hug. Held her tight. Outside, the world kept spinning. Somewhere, another landlord was ignoring another maintenance request. Somewhere, another judge was signing an eviction order without a hearing. Somewhere, another billionaire was forgetting what it felt like to be invisible. The fight never truly ended. But in this apartment, On this morning, there was peace. There was pancakes and cartoons and sunlight streaming through the window. There was a father and his daughter, exactly where they belonged. If this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were Colt?